Before we start today's episode, we want you to do something. Take a deep breath, a proper one. Deep in, slow out. Now consider this. If you live in London, that breath might be okay. If you live in New York, Lagos, Madrid or Lahore, that same breath may have carried fine particulate matter at 10, 15, even 17 times the level the World Health Organization considers safe. Same lungs, same heart, completely different consequences. And almost nobody choose where they were born. 8 million people die prematurely every year because of the air they breathe. That is more than HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. It costs the global economy trillions of dollars annually, and yet it receives less than 1% of international development funding.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Sustainability and Climate Podcast. I so love you that anytime I say welcome everyone, I make Labake smile hard. But yeah, I'm excited to be back on the podcast. And as usual, I'm your favorite host, Oluwatobi, Aigbogun. And with me, the usual, the same, the one and only, Labake Ajiboye-Richard. Hi Labake, how you doing?
Hi everybody, I am very well, thank you. I'm excited. It's the start of the summer, which means, I don't know, there's like this childlike excitement I get when summer's coming up. When summer's coming up, if only for the same reason of like you get time off life.
I'm surprised you're excited because you prefer the cold than the heat. So where did this excitement come from?
No. Don't get me wrong. It's not about the weather. It's not about the weather. It's just about the season, the time of year. I think there's just a little bit more carefreeness. I don't know, in people. It's like that summer feeling, right?
Okay.
The summer feeling, I guess, is what I get excited for. Not the weather.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. How have you been? How's the magazine going?
I've been great. The magazine's going really well. So we're working on our 7th issue, which is our energy issue.
Yeah. And
I'm super excited about it. I have kind of fresh inspiration and creativity for the magazine as well.
Okay, let's go.
Yep. So there will be exciting things coming. We're working on kind of really building, a magazine that delivers on its vision to kind of amplify and grow awareness and knowledge around sustainability in Africa. So, for everybody
do you want to give us an idea of what the next episode is all about?
The next episode of the podcast?
Of the magazine.
Oh, it's the energy issue. So it's basically exploring conversations around energy security, Africa's role in kind of securing energy across the world. It explores some conversations around grassroots communities and what they're doing, the perils, if you will, of self-generation in Africa. It explores kind of the geopolitical tensions that we're seeing currently with, energy security and the impact that has on finance, on business, and kind of opportunity on the continent. So there's a lot of really interesting conversations in there. I will share it.
Yeah,
with our audience when it's out. Yes. How about you? How's it going?
Yeah, good. Just like you, last time I said about the summer, I think I'm just excited like the day as it comes by. Summer, winter, anyone that comes, we accept. But yeah, I've been good. A lot happening, but you can't complain.
There's always a lot happening, guys. If you know anything about Toby, you know Toby is always doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 many things.
Yeah, there's a lot happening, and yeah, I think one thing I'm looking forward to is the London Climate Week, which we'll be attending some events, guys, and I'm sure we'll be coming on the next episode to talk about some of the events that we went for and what we saw or what we learned. And yeah, that's one thing I'm looking forward to. I think this is my second time I'm attending the London Climate Week. So I'm looking forward to there's a lot of popular events that I'm looking forward to. So I'm sure it's gonna be an enlightening and interesting week. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to that as well. I'm gonna be at London Climate Week this year as well. Looking forward to attending some of the events. If you're going to be at an event or hosting an event, or feel free to come say hi. I don't bite. Toby bites.
So you wanted to say we don't bite, but it's like, okay, now you're not speaking for yourself. Okay, guys, I don't bite. Since that's how we want to be moving on this podcast, you speak up for yourself.
I'm joking.
But anyways, yes, please reach out to us. We'll be happy to face your event and also be part of it as well.
Yes.
And also to learn and share with our audience as well. So yeah.
100%. Yes. So really looking forward to that. Today on the podcast, we have a very, very exciting guest. I just want to say before we talk about the guest, whatever it is, I just want to say that I feel really inspired by the quality of guests that we have on this podcast. The breadth of conversation. So the different things that they are specialized in and working in and committed and dedicating their time and their careers to feels really exciting. And for us to be a part of these conversations at this time feels kind of really gratifying.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to kind of take a moment to say thank you to our audience for listening, for kind of enabling us to have this platform to bring these kind of people on the podcast. And would love to hear from you guys a little bit more about, what you're learning from some of these really cool executives and leaders and guests that come on the podcast, and a little bit more about what you want to see. But today's episode was really, really interesting to host. And looking forward to you guys listening.
All right. We'll be right back, guys.
If somebody handed you a glass of dirty water, you wouldn't drink it, but none of us can avoid breathing the dirty air that surrounds us.
Jane Burston is the CEO of Clean Air Fund, a global philanthropic organization working to tackle one of the world's most significant and often overlooked environmental and public health challenges: air pollution. Under Jane's leadership, Clean Air Fund has become the leading voice in advancing clean air through science, policy, finance, and cross-sector collaboration. The organization works with governments, businesses, researchers, and civil society around the world to accelerate solutions that improve air quality, protect public health, and deliver climate and economic benefits. Jane also serves as the commissioner of our Common Air Commission and is a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Clean Air, helping to shape the global agenda on one of the defining environmental issues of our time. Before founding Clean Air Fund, Jane served as the head of climate and energy science in the UK government, overseeing the UK's greenhouse gas inventory and managing a £45 million climate science program. Earlier in her career, she led a team of more than 150 scientists at the UK's National Physical Laboratory, working across air quality, greenhouse gas measurement, and renewable energy. Jane's career has spanned social entrepreneurship, management consulting, and international collaboration. Her contributions have been widely recognized. In 2025, she was appointed an Officer of the Order of the British Empire, OBE, for services to tackling air pollution in the UK and globally. She's been named a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum, recognized by Wired as one of the changemakers of tomorrow, and is listed as Europe's 40 under 40 young leaders. Jane is helping to redefine the way we think about clean air as an environmental issue, but also as a foundation for healthier societies, stronger economies, and a more sustainable future. Jane, welcome to the Sustainability and Climate Podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. Great to meet you both.
Great to meet you. So we're really excited about this conversation around air pollution. And my first question is, air pollution is one of those things that contributes millions to premature deaths annually, but it receives less attention than climate change within those conversations. Why do you think one of the world's deadliest and most economically costly environmental problems is still treated as a niche issue as opposed to a core development, health, and economic priority?
Yeah, you're right. It does often receive very little attention, especially when you compare it to the vast number of deaths from air pollution, something like 15% of all deaths, which is staggering. I think it's because sometimes air pollution is actually invisible. You know, it's famous when you can see it, but a lot of the time it's there and you can't see it. And when you can't see it, the data also often isn't there. We know that 36% of countries, covering about 1 billion people, aren't currently monitoring their air quality. And only a quarter of countries provide full public access to useful air quality data. So for most people, it's just not something that they're seeing in their everyday lives. And so it's not really a main topic of conversation. I think another reason is that in lots of places, because it's really severe in particular seasons, it gets attention just for a season, and people might pin the pollution on one particular source that's happening at the time. And then it's easy to think that for the rest of the time, there's no pollution there just because it's dropped from this incredibly high amount, but often to a really still quite high amount. And so we see in a lot of different countries, maybe the media will focus on air pollution for a month or 2 months. And then there's maybe a little bit of action, but not sustained enough to really make changes. And then people forget about it again for the rest of the year. And then I think the final reason is, despite the super huge number of deaths, because air pollution isn't the thing that's written on the death certificate. People are dying from asthma attacks or lung cancer or heart attacks or strokes or all of these things that are caused or exacerbated by air pollution. But it's not pinned on air pollution at the time for particular individuals, then it's less present in people's minds and there's less of an uproar about it.
So, you see, according to your reports, right, it says that less than 1% of international development funding has been directed towards air pollution, despite the enormous health and economic impacts. But if the economic returns are so compelling, why is capital still failing to flow towards clean air solutions?
Yeah, so you're completely right. It's a massive economic burden, and it's mostly because of the health burden that we were just talking about. So it's things like the productivity drop if people can't work because they're sick or they're off work, looking after sick kids, people dying of working age, the huge healthcare costs for the government. And then there are economic harms that are about specific industries. So, for example, some sorts of pollution really affect plant growth. So crop yields come right down when there's high air pollution. The sun can't get through to solar panels, so solar yields come down. International tourism can be affected. In really polluted cities, they reduce their competitiveness because people don't want to move there for work. So there's lots of different ways in which air pollution affects the economy of a country, productivity being the main one. And we know that around the world, I think it's about 1.2 billion working days are already lost to air pollution, and that's going to go up more than double by 2060 if we don't do something about it. But there is a persistent misconception that tackling air pollution is simply a cost or it slows growth, despite the fact that tackling it is one of the highest return investments that governments can make. So we've seen evidence in the EU, for example. The OECD did an analysis of the benefits of air quality policy. And they've estimated that between 2011 and 2022, improvements in air quality accounted for a third of productivity growth in the EU. So we've got this evidence. There's even more compelling evidence from the US. I think it was something like for every $1 invested, there was a $30 return to the US economy. And we've got similar projections from organisations calculating if we meet things like the WHO targets, how much will the economic benefit be for the future? But there's still no capital flowing, as you say, or very limited. I think part of the reason is structural. So air pollution doesn't sit neatly in one funding category, it cuts across health, across climate, as you said earlier, development, infrastructure, which just makes it harder to fund. And at the same time, obviously, many donors have been under a lot of pressure to respond to the immediate health crises that we've seen, like COVID and other things, which has shifted some development funding. And development funding in general is going down quite significantly. So the donors that remain, or the money that remains, is trying to plug some of the gaps created by the withdrawal of USAID and the reduction from many other countries in their aid budgets.
So interesting, because I think from everything you're saying, I'm starting to think about air pollution almost as the invisible problem. And one link that you just made that I didn't even think about was solar yields coming down and how kind of it blocks the rays of the sun. And there definitely needs to be a little bit more education for the general public even about air pollution and all the things that it affects. And I think that is something that we need to talk a little bit more about. But let's talk a little bit about urbanization and the relationship between urbanization and air pollution. So many countries have kind of accepted pollution as an inevitable consequence of industrialization and economic growth. So as continents like Africa, where I'm from, and Asia urbanize, do you think we've broken that paradigm, or are we still repeating some of the mistakes that we made in the past? And how can continents like Africa and Asia do things a little bit differently to see different results?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. And unfortunately, I think that we are mostly repeating a lot of the same mistakes. Rather than taking air quality into account when cities are being planned and transport infrastructure is being built, I think it gets treated as a problem to fix later. I think in some sectors, it's probably a matter of wealth. So, for example, fuel standards in the transport sector, it's hard to jump straight to the top fuel standard if people can't afford like super high quality fuel, or if the refineries aren't at the standard that they can produce it. But in other cases, I do think that for very limited additional capital, the clean option is possible. And in some cases, it even costs less rather than more. One example would be developing cities that are easier to walk and cycle in. Because usually they're already the modes of transport for the lowest income communities, and then they just don't get prioritized in development. I remember a few years ago, I went to Tamale in the north of Ghana, and I had read before I went there that it was one of the fastest growing cities in Africa. This was pre-pandemic. And that also that the main form of transport was bicycle. But when I got there, a brand new road had just been built, and there was no accommodation at all for a bike lane, for pavements, and it actually was making the city much less passable by walking and cycling because the tarmac was amazing. So the cars were going super fast. There were more cars, and it just kind of seemed quite dangerous for active mobility in a way that it probably hadn't been before when the cars were moving slower, the road was poorer quality. And you kind of think, well, with that amount of money being spent on road development, would it not have been possible to also have created a bike lane and a pavement alongside? How much additional money would that have cost? And it's a shame that those sorts of things don't get taken into account. So one of the things that really triggered for me was the desire to work with development agencies and development banks to start to incorporate air quality thinking into sectoral projects. These development banks already have like an air quality team and some budget for air quality specific projects, but maybe sectoral officers like people doing the transport projects or the waste projects, the infrastructure projects aren't thinking about air quality. And on the back of that, with a number of development banks, we've developed a toolkit for those finance institutions to start to build air quality metrics into what they're doing. And that will hopefully make it visible both where there are opportunities to add something onto a project that will be beneficial for air quality and the potential harms that a project will be making to air quality so that they can be planned for and remediated and hopefully reduced while the project is being deployed.
That's very interesting, because I was going to say, I live in Lagos and I do see some people ride bicycles. And I always wonder, how safe is it to really ride these bicycles, essentially because of what you're saying, right? It's not safe on the roads. There's no allocations made for them. And I was going to say we need stronger partnerships. And I just have like a side question to that, because I was going to mention partnerships with, the other sectoral projects, as you said. So the people working on transportation, the people working, on energy and all of these things. What do you think are some of the barriers, if you will? Because there are a lot of projects and I would use Lagos as a case study. There are a lot of projects around kind of improving energy, improving transportation, a lot of these things, but there still isn't a lot of conversation around air pollution and air quality. In a place like Lagos, where we have generators to self-generate electricity, which obviously has so much contribution to air pollution and air quality and stuff, and even things like noise pollution, which I know is not part of this conversation, but pollution in general is not considered as seriously, if you will. And so what would you say, just from your experience, are some of the barriers that these sectoral projects might face in incorporating air quality and air pollution into kind of their metrics?
It's a super good question. I think sometimes knowledge, it's out there. It's not that we don't know what will improve the air quality, but maybe it's not in the right hands. There's lots of great technical reports, but if you're a busy urban planner or project officer looking at your particular sector, it's maybe not something that you've thought of and not resources that you've been trained in. I think the metrics make a big difference. So, your question from earlier about why is air quality not so high profile as climate change? I think one of the major successes of the COP process is that now loads of the finance that's coming through, and lots of governments have got metrics on carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. The same isn't true of air pollution. And so if we can add in even a couple of very simple measures on air quality, the outcomes of projects and tracking air quality in different countries, I think they will start to raise it in people's minds, and they will be asking themselves the question, how can I do better on this? Because ultimately, all of these things make people's lives better. The same things that reduce pollution very often reduce greenhouse gases, very often reduce noise. They're improving people's health. So if we can prioritize the stuff that ticks all of those boxes, it will also be ticking these economic development boxes because of the improvements in health, meaning improvements in productivity. And we get the kind of triple win on health, climate, economic development, and actually quadruple quality of life as well.
Still on that same question, because I noticed that Clean Air works directly in Ghana. Is there something that you've learned in Ghana that has surprised you?
I think something one thing that surprised me is the appetite for journalists, for example, to learn about air quality. There wasn't a huge amount of media coverage on the topic in the past. And so a partner of ours ran a few training courses for journalists just on the basics. And there was a huge amount of interest in learning about monitoring, about different sources of pollution, where it's coming from, what the potential solutions would be. And reporting has increased significantly as a consequence of that. So, the appetite for people to find out more about some of the, what you might think are the important but potentially boring technical elements of the topic. Another thing is just how cheaply solutions can be implemented. So we work with a different partner on creating areas around and in the front of schools to make it safe, to reduce the air pollution when the children will be playing outside or arriving to and from school. It's usually a time when children are quite exposed to transport pollution. And the effect of pollution on children is particularly bad because they're growing and their organs are developing. And air pollution can create really bad health consequences for the rest of their lives. And what this project worked on in Ghana was how could we reduce traffic around the front of a school and create areas away from traffic for kids to play and spend their time that are more appealing, so that they were also more distant from the pollution, because it can be quite local sometimes. And really just, with a few cans of paint, making kind of play areas away from the road and a few planters to separate the front of the school from the road and some temporary barriers so that traffic couldn't use the street during pick-up and drop-off times and play times. It can reduce the pollution quite significantly with really very low cost.
You've spent many years making the economic case for clean air, and the evidence keeps stacking up. And just yesterday, researchers in Toronto, they published findings from over 11,000 ART scans showing that long-term pollution exposure literally shows up in people's arteries. Either it's damaged or it's narrow or hardened. And you can say this is a wealthy city. This is a wealthy country where with, I'll say, relatively clean air by global standards. So we can see that the costs are real. But why do you think that the policymakers still underestimate how much pollution is already costing their economies right now?
I think, it's a tough one. I mean, there's a strong pull often towards short-term priorities. Okay. And whilst air quality, when you reduce air pollution, there are some very quick gains for health and climate. There's some illnesses that, and the effects, for example, on pregnant women and their babies, that you reduce the pollution. And obviously, once the air is clean, for people who are getting pregnant, their whole pregnancy term, the air is cleaner and the outcomes are better. Also for things like asthma attacks, the minute that the pollution drops, the number of asthma attacks will drop. So there's some short-term gains there. There's also some short-term gains on climate because some of the air pollutants that are harmful for our health are also directly harmful for the climate, things like black carbon and tropospheric ozone. Those things maybe aren't so visible to policymakers. And so it's thought of often as a long-term problem, which it also is. The health impacts are also long-term, things like lung cancer and heart attacks and strokes are because of the health impacts that build up over time. So it gets kind of, air quality and air pollution reduction gets kind of pushed out when governments are under pressure to do things like keep energy prices low or support growth in the near term, which is why I think we see things like very high levels of fossil fuel subsidies, even though those things lock in larger economic costs over time because of the consequences of pollution. And I think even when the evidence is clear, it can sometimes be quite politically difficult to act. We know on the one hand, people really want clean air. Yeah. And on the other hand, some people, not everybody, also want to use their car whenever they like, for example. So often the negative voices, whilst they're in the minority, can be the loudest. We saw that recently in London with the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone, which is a really big clean air zone that now covers the whole of London, 10 million people. And it started in the centre and then it got expanded once. When it was getting expanded to the whole of London, there was quite a bit of press coverage of a small group of people that were protesting by doing things like blowing up the camera that would monitor in their part of London. 5 councils, 5 London boroughs launched a joint legal challenge, for example. But when we saw the results of the ultra-low emission zone, having passed through all of the legal challenges, it's incredibly effective at reducing NO2 pollution. The concentrations are more than 50% lower in central London, about a quarter lower in outer London. And so that's had a really rapid impact, including on the many people that don't even own a car. So politicians are having to balance the potential supporters, the potential opposition, the potential for misinformation. And I think it's a tricky balance. And also, to be fair, a lot of the health impact evidence has only come to light quite recently. So we've only seen in the last few years more evidence about the impact of pollution on things like dementia, education because of lack of ability to concentrate, and some of those things. So I think not everybody is necessarily aware of all of the potential impacts.
But speaking of cancer, I remember earlier this year, air pollution was added to the European Code Against Cancer. And sometimes I question if this form of medical recognition actually changed the political mathematics, if I'll put it that way, because we know these things, these laws are there, but implementation, like it's really a problem. So yeah.
I was also going to say it like raises the question of, convenience versus like long-term benefit, right? The people that you mentioned would prefer to ride their cars or, prefer not to be on the train during rush hour or whatever it is. But we're starting to see more discussion around airshed-based approaches, particularly in countries like India. Do you think this signals a fundamental shift in how governments need to think about environmental governance?
Yes, I think so. And I think it's very helpful. So air pollution is most often thought of as a local issue, which actually to your earlier question is possibly one of the reasons, again, why it's deprioritized by national governments. But it can, and it is a local issue too. It can vary very significantly from neighborhood to neighborhood. But some air pollution can also be transported quite a long way. So this idea of the airshed approach is looking at, for any particular place, where is the pollution coming from? A certain percentage will definitely be coming from that place. But depending on the geography and how polluted neighbouring places are and the wind speed and direction, a lot will be blowing in from outside sometimes too. So in places like India, we know, for example, that the Indo-Gangetic Plain, which is the area at the top of India, is the most polluted region. And in Delhi, for example, crop stubble burning around Delhi in the Indo-Gangetic Plain, blowing into Delhi, is one of the reasons that at certain points in the year, the pollution in Delhi is quite high. That crop stubble burning pollution mixes with other sorts of pollution in Delhi to increase the pollution levels quite significantly. And so the states in India have recognised the need to reduce pollution all at the same time as one another, because they know that they will benefit from one another's reductions as well as their own local reductions. The World Bank has really been helping a lot with this approach. And they found that if the states cooperated together in reducing air pollution, it could lead to annual savings of $7 billion. So there's a real incentive to work on the issue together, not least as well because then the states can learn from one another about which approach will work the best. They can replicate the most successful policies and really have a big impact on the region as a whole. And then when it comes to airsheds that cover country boundaries, it's encouraging that countries are starting to think a bit more about it and take an airshed approach with their neighbours too. So the main regional agreement that exists is the Gothenburg Protocol, which is now considering if and how to incorporate black carbon emissions, which could be an important step towards including transboundary emissions of this particular superpollutant. And we know in Southeast Asia, there are sets of countries working on agreements together. So Thailand, Myanmar and Laos, for example, have endorsed a joint action plan trying to address regional seasonal haze that smothers an area that they all share. It's really encouraging to see the amount of cooperation going on now on air quality.
You see, the Clean Air Fund has worked with cities all over the world, and I can say that the evidence is remarkable. But my question is, when you compare the cities that genuinely move the dial with the ones who are still struggling a bit, what is that single biggest differentiator?
I want to say political leadership, but that also depends on lots of other factors. So, I mean, there's maybe the answer is there is actually no single differentiator. We have this program called Breathe Cities, It's in partnership with Bloomberg Philanthropies and C40 and lots of grassroots partners from all over the world, working in 15 major cities like Rio, Accra, London, Warsaw, Bogota, Jakarta. And what we have identified through that program is that there's really kind of four main things that need to be in place for progress to accelerate. And they are data and evidence. So how much pollution is there? Where is it coming from? What's the health impact? What's the economic impact? Number two are for stakeholder and community engagement. So who is most affected? What do they want? How can the policies best accommodate their needs? Is there public demand for solutions? Thirdly, political and policy ambition, which is often dependent on the availability of data for people to know that there's a problem and that public demand. And good planning from the local authorities. Once the political leadership wants to do something, what is the policy that is going to be implemented, and how will it be implemented? Are there examples of it happening elsewhere in the world? And how can we learn from that? If not, what are the different ways that we can pilot and test this? And then number four, enforcement. And we've got examples from the cities that we've worked with of big successes when all of those four things are in place. So the differentiator, I guess, would be that all of those four things are there. It's not linear in the way that I described it. It's often a bit of a circle. You could start with the community engagement and members of the public saying, hang on, why is there no data? Jump back to data. Or it could start with people all of a sudden becoming aware of lots of pollution in their neighbourhood because of the availability of data, and then becoming concerned and raising it with the politicians. So the action can happen in a different order, but usually we see those four things present when there's progress happening.
Awesome. So air pollution is, in a lot of this conversation as well, been spoken about as, a public health issue, among other things. But we also find that it's deeply connected to inequality. So communities living near industrial sites, informal settlements exposed to kind of waste burning, or poor urban populations living close to major roads, as you mentioned. The exposure is quite rarely distributed evenly. So how do you think governments and businesses can think about clean air through a justice lens, not just in the financing? Because I was reading something before our conversation that said less than 1% of global philanthropic funding for outdoor air quality was given to Africa, right? In comparison to, I think it was 165 million towards North America. So even in financing, what are some of the ways that I guess we can even out the intervention?
Yeah, it's very true. The same trends that you just mentioned with philanthropic funding are present with development aid as well. Africa gets less than 5% of the development aid that's available for air quality. Southeast Asia, something like 85%. I haven't got that statistic spot on, but around that. So it's something. Providing the data that tells us that is one thing, and that's why we've really focused on shining a light on where the money is going, just to make that visible to people. I think justice is a big issue in lots of different ways. I mean, for a start, 9 out of the 10 deaths attributed to outdoor air pollution are in low and middle income countries. And then wherever you are in the world, it's the lowest income communities and the most vulnerable communities that are disproportionately exposed to air pollution because they tend to live in the most polluted neighbourhoods. They can't afford to move away from, for example, the side of a busy road, or living right next door to an industrial facility, or they might have jobs that make them more exposed to pollution. So the main advice that we would give to governments and also businesses who are planning interventions in this space is to include the most affected communities in the planning, to make visible their exposure in the data. One thing that we sometimes see is that there are no monitors in the lower income neighbourhoods, so it's not possible to tell what the air pollution levels are. So we need this evidence of the disparities in local levels of pollution and in who measures it, because there's been a lot of success with organisations that have supported communities to generate the evidence themselves, to go and monitor the pollution. And when residents measure air in their own neighbourhoods, they have access to the data, they understand it, they can see what the sources are with their own eyes, and they engage. They can then be more informed to engage with the government about it, rather than having to access or try and access government or research data that maybe is less easy to interpret. So an example from Ghana is our partner, the People's Dialogue on Human Settlements, trained clean air community champions to collect more than 1,400 readings across their communities. And they were showing that pollution levels were 4 to 7 times higher than the WHO guidelines. And so then they supported those individuals to speak to councillors from the local assemblies to integrate clean air into the development plans in ways that they recommended.
Wow. You see, we live in a world that is fragmenting, right? There is industrial reshoring, there is the energy security panic, the defense budget in most countries, or almost all countries, is swallowing the development spending. And there's this geopolitical competition that is going on. Do you think these forces are going to accelerate progress on clean air, or it will undermine it?
I think there's the possibility of both. There's a real risk that short-term priorities take precedence over longer-term environmental and health goals. So, for example, in this energy crisis, there's a heavier reliance on domestically produced fossil fuels or increased fossil fuel subsidies to keep energy costs down, or less coordination between countries at exactly the moment when cooperation is most needed. But those same pressures could also act as a catalyst to transition, especially around energy security and economic resilience. They could force governments to think differently, to make faster progress on the electrification of transport, or on making public transport more accessible and affordable for people, and to reduce their dependence on imported fossil fuels. So we're at a point where I think it could go both ways. I know that a lot of people in the sector are working hard to make the clean solutions obvious to government, and the economic benefits, like we've talked about today, obvious to government, so that there's the confidence to invest in the solutions that we know will work and the things that we know will be beneficial for economic productivity and quality of life in the short and the long term.
Awesome. So to finish off on this conversation, if you were advising a finance minister as opposed to an environmental minister, how would you make the case that investing in clean air is one of the smartest economic decisions a country can make?
Well, I will produce the statistics I mentioned before that have been measured on benefits that have already happened in places. So the US EPA one, about $1 invested led to $30 of return. And the EU one, about a third of productivity gains were based on air pollution reduction, because I think evidence of what has already happened is the most compelling. And then I would produce evidence of the forecasts of what would happen if you didn't act. A piece of research that we funded said that in Africa, for example, the costs are likely to increase by 6 times if air pollution is not addressed. Because sometimes talking about the risk of something bad happening is more compelling than the benefits of something good happening. And I would also direct them to the crossover between climate action and air quality action, because many countries have already committed to climate action. And I think what people don't often understand is that because the sources of health-harming air pollution and the sources of greenhouse gases are often the same thing, burning fossil fuels for transport, industry, energy, the solutions can also be the same thing. So maybe the costs of reducing air pollution are a lot lower than you think if you prioritize particular climate actions that are very from sources that are very polluting. So joint climate and air quality action plans and a joint financing plan for that is something that I would recommend.
Awesome. I hope any finance minister is listening.
Me too.
Awesome. All right, Jane, before we go, right, we have a tradition on this podcast where we give our guests their flowers while they can still smell them. And today I want to take my time to give you your flowers because I don't think you hear it often. You see, in football, there's something we call GOAT in terms of greatest of all time. We say Messi or Ronaldo. In basketball, we say LeBron James or Kobe Bryant. But I think in this conversation, I would say you're my GOAT because while I was preparing for this episode, I learned something about you that has stayed with me all through the week. At 11 years old, you gave up eating meat. 11. And as a student of Cambridge, while everyone else was worrying about exams, you were campaigning to get plastic out of your college canteen. Now, I mention all this because it tells me something that your CV never could. The conviction came first. Before the titles, before the OBE, before the $200 million, there was a child who looked at the world and decided it could be better and that she was going to do something about it. Most people will lose that, but you never did. And look at what that conviction has built. You read philosophy at Cambridge and you took a first. And then instead of disappearing into academia like some people would do, or moving to the big cities, you went where the problem were. You ran the UK's greenhouse gas inventory. You led 150 scientists. And then in 2019, when air pollution was barely a footnote in this global conversation that we have today, you walked away from the security of all of it and you founded the Clean Air Fund. You see, people forget how lonely that must have been. There was no movement waiting for you. There was no COP. There was no COP for clean air, rather. But less than 1% of development funding, you were making the case to rooms that did not want to hear it year after year, and you simply refused to stop. Now, here's the thing about your work that humbles me, right? The people you have saved will never know your name. The child in Accra who grows up without asthma, the grandmother in India who gets more 10 years with her family, the baby born next year in Lagos, Nigeria, Labake is currently, whose lungs will develop the way their lungs are supposed to. They will never know that there was a woman in London who spent decades fighting for the air in their chests. I think that is the purest kind of legacy there is, the kind that asks for nothing back. And when the Majesty government made you an officer of the Order of the British Empire this year, your first instinct was not to take the credit. You said, and I'm quoting you, Jane, "This immense honor is a tribute to the incredible progress we have made in putting clean air at the heart of climate and health agenda around the world. We, our partners, my team, that is who you are. The honor was yours, but you handed it straight to everyone around you." And I will say this, Jane, that leaders like that are rare. They are genuinely rare. But the words of yours that keep coming back to me is not about the policy or the finance. Years ago, you described your vision for this work, and you said, "My vision is that we achieve clean air as soon as possible so that we have a world where everybody can go outside and play outside whenever they want. Let's have a world where everybody can travel sustainably and have fulfilling careers affected by this scourge of air pollution. And so I do not want to continue going on and on and on, but I just want you to know that on behalf of this podcast, on behalf of myself, on behalf of Labake, and the thousands of listeners that we have in over 100 countries, we want to say thank you. Thank you for giving us clean air that we breathe in, because it takes the courage to start, and you took that courage. And I want to thank you for the stubbornness to continue. And thank you for proving that one person with conviction can really change the whole world. And so on behalf of myself, thank you so much, Jane.
Oh, thank you so much. That is the sweetest thing that I think anyone has ever said to me. And you reminded me at the end there when the last time I visited Ghana, I was given a Ghanaian name,
Wow.
Ya. And the surname means stubborn woman. I took it as a compliment.
Yes, it's definitely a compliment.
That
is very, very kind. Very kind indeed. I'm gonna take that clip and play it back to myself on bad days.
Oh, awesome.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Good.
Thank you so much, guys, and to everyone listening. If this conversation has moved you, please share it, send it to one person who needs to hear it, because the air does not belong to government or corporations. It belongs to all of us. And so it is important that we fight for it. And until next time, keep amplifying Ed voice and take care of yourself and everyone around you. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.